It is no question that sub bass is the most important factor in electronic music. So in this video, what I wanted to do was give you 4 things that you could do to make sure you're writing perfect bass lines every time from here on out. And I personally guarantee that if you watch this entire video from beginning to end, without skipping any information, that your bass writing skills will increase by at least 20% by the end of this video. First tip I wanted to talk to you about is a guideline that I always set for myself, and that is that your sub bass should always be in between 40 and 80 to 90 hertz. So I have a little trap beat here. It sounds like this. Hey, buddy. Just an empty little trap beat without a lead. If I take the sub bass, what I do is I add an EQ of choice onto this sub bass line. So I have a couple EQs here that I'm going to bring up. And this analysis works best with any graphic EQs where you can actually see the frequencies of the bass line. This wouldn't work with like an analog EQ or any EQ that doesn't allow you to see the frequencies of your sound. So I'm going to pause it here, and it looks like the peak of this bass line is hitting at right about 40 hertz. So that would mean that I'm right in my hot spot. Any bit below that, I would have to find different bass notes to hit or change the key of the entire song so that my bass line was hitting in between that 40 and 80 to 90 hertz range. The next trick is super important, and it has to do with layering your bass line. So when you layer your bass line, you always have your key component, which is your sub bass. And my sub bass in this project sounds like this. So when I layer this sub bass, my layers have to be in the same exact octave as this sub bass for it to sound good and tight. If they're an octave up or an octave down, it's going to throw my whole bass line off, and I'm really going to struggle to get that bass line to sound good with the rest of my song. So I have 2 layers here. So this is a higher bass layer that adds character, and this is also a higher bass layer here that adds character. Although these bass layers have higher frequencies and I can hear them better, they are still in the same exact octave as my sub bass. And when they're in the same octave, that means they're going to be tight and they're going to work together. So if we look at the piano roll, there's no different octaves here. Whereas if I took these bass layers, so I'm going to take the higher frequency layers and put them up an octave. So now we have a sub bass that's down here and my higher octave layers up here. And if we play them, you can hear that my sub bass is really low and there's a big hole in between my sub bass and my high bass layers. So I want everything to be as close as possible, and the best way to do that is just to make sure your bass layers are in the same octave as your sub bass, so then they could work together. Number 3 is that you should make sure your heavier instruments all have some kind of low cut or low shelf filtering on them. So we have a little drop here and it sounds like this. And it is the Chainsmoker Something Like You remake that I used in another video. And what I wanted to show you is that anytime you have a bass line, which is going to be every time, and your bass line, like I said, is going to be strong somewhere in between 40 and 80 hertz, and that is no exception for this bass line here. But something to know about sub bass is that it is extremely delicate, and that means anytime you have another instrument that also exists down here, you have to filter that instrument away from this low end area so that your bass line can go uninterrupted. If you fail to do this, then you will create mud in your mix, and mud is just a slang term for too many instruments existing in a certain range of the EQ, and it just doesn't sound good. It sounds clogged up and not pleasant on the ear. So in terms of heaviness, I always consider chords to be on the heavier side because they usually take up a large portion of this EQ spectrum here. And anytime they take up a large portion, that means they're going to eat into this sub bass area. Remember I said, sub bass has to go uninterrupted. So what am I going to do on each of these chord layers? I'm just going to add an EQ to them and add some sort of low shelf or low cut. And just by doing that, my bass line will be uninterrupted and will sound nice and big. So if you guys would like to learn more about mixing, sound design, chord writing, melody writing, and songwriting, come join me in my EDM bootcamp. I left a link for that in the top of the description below. And I even have something special for you guys today. I left a link for my free mixing cheat sheet in the description below. So make sure you go ahead and download that as well, so that you never have to struggle when you get to the mixing stage of your song ever again. And I'll see you guys in the next video.